The old Victorian house on Elm Street stood at the edge of Willow Creek, a quiet suburb where the biggest excitement was the annual harvest fair. It had been empty for years, or so the real estate agent said, but when Sarah pulled up in her rented U-Haul one crisp autumn afternoon, she couldn't shake the feeling that the place had been waiting for her. The porch creaked under her sneakers as she fumbled with the key, the air thick with the scent of fallen leaves and something faintly metallic like rust from the downspout. She stepped inside, and the door swung shut behind her with a soft thud that echoed too loudly in the empty foyer. Sunlight filtered through dust motes, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. Sarah set down her box of kitchen essentials and paused, listening. The house was silent, but not the comforting kind of silence. It was the kind that presses against your eardrums as if holding its breath. Upstairs, a floorboard groaned faintly. Though she hadn't climbed the stairs yet, she told herself it was settling, just an old house adjusting to new life. But as she turned toward the living room, her eyes caught on a narrow door tucked beside the staircase, painted the same faded white as the walls, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. No one had mentioned it during the walkthrough. Not the agent, not the previous owner's vague references to minor quirks. Sarah shook it off and got to work unpacking. At 32, she'd moved here from the bustle of Chicago for a fresh start after her divorce. Willow Creek promised affordable rent, a slower pace, and a job at the local library that let her lose herself in stories. The house was a steal, 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen and a backyard that backed onto woods, perfect for rebuilding. By evening, she'd arranged the couch in the living room and hung a few curtains, the kind with subtle floral patterns that made the place feel like home. She microwaved a frozen dinner at the Formica counter, scrolling through her phone for signal that kept dropping in and out. The suburb's Wi-Fi was spotty, but she'd get it sorted. That night, as she lay in the master bedroom upstairs, the house whispered to itself. Wind rattled the panes, or maybe it was branches scraping the siding. Sarah drifted off to the hum of crickets outside, but sometime around 2 a.m., she woke to a sound like muffled footsteps below. Her heart quickened, but she lay still, ears straining. Nothing, just the refrigerator kicking on in the kitchen. She checked her phone. No bars, no service. Rolling over, she convinced herself it was the neighbor's dog or a raccoon in the trash. Houses made noises. She'd read that in one of her real estate books. The next morning, sunlight poured in, chasing away the shadows. Sarah brewed coffee in the kitchen, the aroma filling the air as she planned her day. Grocery run to the diner on Main Street, then unpacking the rest. As she sipped from her mug, she noticed the narrow door again from across the hall. It blended so seamlessly with the wainscoting that she'd walked past it twice without a second glance. Curiosity tugged at her. She crossed the foyer and tried the knob. Locked, the brass cool and unyielding. No key among the ones the agent had given her. Odd, but not alarming. Maybe it led to a storage closet or the basement stairs. She'd ask the landlord later. At the Willow Creek Diner, the place buzzed with locals in flannel shirts and baseball caps, nursing eggs and black coffee. Sarah slid into a booth, ordering pancakes from a waitress named Betty, who had a warm smile and stories about the town's history. "That old place on Elm? Been around since the 1920s, Betty said, refilling her cup. "Folks come and go, but it always seems to draw the right people." Sarah laughed it off, mentioning the locked door. Betty's expression flickered, just a pause, a glance toward the window, before she shrugged. "Probably just an old pantry or something. Houses like that have secrets, but nothing worth fretting over." The pancakes arrived steaming, and Sarah let the conversation drift to library events and the best hiking trails. Back home, the afternoon light slanted through the windows as she hauled boxes up the stairs. In the hallway upstairs, she paused to catch her breath, and that's when she saw it, a faint outline on the wallpaper right above the narrow door below. It looked like someone had traced a rectangle there once. perhaps from hanging a picture or marking a boundary, but the paper was pristine everywhere else, as if that spot had been carefully preserved. She ran her fingers over it, smooth, no texture difference. Shaking her head, she continued unpacking, stacking books on the shelves. Her favorite thriller, about a woman unraveling family secrets in a coastal town, went on the nightstand. Fitting, she thought, with a wry smile. As dusk fell, Sarah explored the rest of the house more thoroughly. The living room opened to a dining area with a bay window overlooking the yard, where fireflies began to flicker. The 2 spare bedrooms upstairs were empty but airy, one with a view of the street and the other facing the dense woods behind. Downstairs, the kitchen led to a small laundry room, and beyond that, a back door to the porch. No sign of that mysterious door anywhere else. She tried the knob again on her way to bed, half expecting it to give this time. Still locked. A soft click echoed from inside as she turned away. Or maybe it was her imagination. The house was playing tricks, adapting to her presence. That evening she called her sister in Chicago. The signal held just long enough for a quick chat, updates on the move, assurances that everything was fine. "It's peaceful here," Sarah said, glancing at the door from the couch, like the world slowed down. Her sister teased her about becoming a small-town recluse, and they laughed. Hanging up, Sarah felt a twinge of isolation, the kind that sneaks up in unfamiliar places. She poured a glass of wine and settled in with her book, the pages turning under the lamp's glow. But as the clock ticked past 10, a chill settled in the air. From the corner of her eye, she thought she saw the door's knob turn slightly, a quarter twist before settling back. She blinked and it was still. Heart pounding softly, she stood and approached, pressing her ear to the wood. Silence. Absolute weighted silence. Upstairs in bed, the footsteps returned, not clear but rhythmic, like someone pacing in socks on carpet. They seemed to come from below, near the foyer. Sarah sat up, straining to listen. The sound faded, then stopped altogether. She checked the locks on her bedroom door, an old habit from city living, and slid under the covers. The house creaked once more, a long sigh, as if content for now. Outside, the woods rustled, and in the distance a car's headlights swept the street before vanishing into the night. Sarah closed her eyes, telling herself it was nothing. But sleep came fitfully, haunted by the outline of that unmarked door and the unspoken question of what lay behind it. The days blurred into a routine that Sarah clung to like a lifeline. Mornings began with the percolator gurgling on the kitchen counter, steam rising in lazy curls as she sliced fruit and checked the weather app on her phone. Willow Creek's forecast was always the same: mild temps, scattered clouds, a chance of rain that never quite materialized. She'd drive her beat-up sedan down Elm Street to the library, where the air smelled of aged paper and fresh ink, and lose hours shelving returns or recommending cozy mysteries to patrons who favored the armchairs by the window. The job was undemanding, a gentle rhythm that let her mind wander without straying too far from the present. Afternoons were for the house. She'd unpack another box, arranging knickknacks on the mantel or wiping down the windowsills where dust gathered like forgotten secrets. The narrow door remained a fixture in her peripheral vision, a silent sentinel in the foyer. She avoided it mostly, but sometimes her gaze lingered, tracing the brass knob's patina. On the third day, she found the landlord's number in her emails and left a voicemail, her voice steady as she described the door and asked for a spare key. "It's probably nothing," she added, as if to convince herself. No callback came that evening, and by the next morning she'd pushed it aside again. It was during one of those unpacking sessions that the first real oddity surfaced. Not dramatic, but insistent, like a thread pulling loose from a sweater. Sarah was in the upstairs hallway, sorting linens into the linen closet, when she noticed the air felt cooler there than in the rest of the house. The thermostat read a steady 72, but stepping out from the bedroom, A draught whispered across her skin, carrying a faint, musty scent, like damp earth after a storm. She paused, towel in hand, and glanced down the stairs. The foyer looked unchanged, sunlight pooling on the floorboards. Shrugging, she closed the closet door and descended, but as her foot hit the last step, the scent faded, replaced by the familiar aroma of her coffee lingering from breakfast. That night, after a shift at the library, where she'd helped an elderly woman find a book on local folklore, tales of Willow Creek's founding families and their eccentric habits, Sarah stopped at the diner for takeout. Betty waved her over with a grin, sliding a foil container of meatloaf across the counter. "Settling in all right?" the waitress asked, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Sarah nodded, mentioning the voicemail to the landlord. Betty's smile held, but she busied herself with a coffee pot, her response casual. "Old places like that, they got their ways. If it's locked, maybe it's best left that way. Saves on surprises." Sarah chuckled, assuming it was small-town humor, and headed home as twilight painted the sky in bruised purples. The meatloaf warmed in the microwave as she kicked off her shoes in the living room. She flicked on the TV, settling for a rerun of a sitcom that filled the space with canned laughter, but her attention drifted. From the kitchen, a soft scrape echoed, like a chair leg against wood, though she lived alone. She muted the volume and listened. Silence. Then, faintly, from the direction of the foyer, a rustle, as if pages were turning in an empty room. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to the kitchen, plating the food and eating at the table. It was the house, she reasoned, expansion joints, wind through cracks, nothing more. Sleep evaded her longer that night. Lying in the master bedroom, the ceiling fan whirred overhead, casting rotating shadows that danced like fingers on the walls. Around midnight, the footsteps returned, clearer this time, a measured tread crossing the foyer below. Thud. Pause. Thud. Not hurried, but deliberate, as if someone were measuring the space. Sarah sat up, sheets pooling around her waist, and reached for her phone. Still no service, the screen glowing blankly in the dark. She slipped out of bed, padding to the door in her socks, and eased it open. The hallway stretched empty, moonlight filtering through a window at the far end. Downstairs, the sounds had stopped, but the air felt charged, expectant. Descending the stairs felt like wading through water, each step deliberate to avoid creaks. In the foyer, she flipped on the light switch, the bulb buzzing to life with a hesitant flicker. The narrow door stood as before, knob motionless. She approached it slowly, hand hovering before grasping the brass. It turned a fraction, cold, unyielding, then caught. But as she pulled back, her eyes caught something new, a thin line of shadow under the door, darker than the gap should allow, as if light from the other side was being blocked. No, that couldn't be right. It was locked, sealed. She knelt, peering through the keyhole, but saw only inky blackness, a void that seemed to stare back. Shaking it off, Sarah retreated to the living room, curling up on the couch with a throw blanket. She scrolled through downloaded podcasts on her phone, selecting one about urban legends, harmless stories of haunted highways and vanishing hitchhikers. The narrator's voice was soothing, a low timbre that drowned out the night's whispers. But midway through an episode, her battery died unexpectedly, the screen going black despite being at half charge that evening. In the sudden quiet, she heard it again, the rustle, closer now, emanating from behind the door. Not pages this time, but a soft exhalation, like breath-fogging glass. By morning, exhaustion clung to her like fog. She brewed extra coffee, strong and black, and headed to work early, hoping the library's bustle would clear her head. The day passed in a haze of routine, sorting donations, chatting with a regular about the upcoming book club, but her thoughts circled back to the house. During lunch, she tried the landlord again, this time leaving a firmer message. "It's just a door," she said aloud to the empty break room, but the words rang hollow. Returning home as the sun dipped low, Sarah noticed the mailbox at the curb was ajar, though she hadn't checked it that morning. Inside, bills and a local flyer for the harvest fair, nothing unusual, but tucked among them was a plain envelope, no stamp, addressed to "Resident" in neat, looping script. She tore it open in the kitchen, blank inside, just a single sheet of cream-colored paper folded once. Unfolding it revealed nothing. No words, no ink, just the faint impression of lines, as if something had been written and erased. Her skin prickled. Who would leave this? A neighbor's mistake, perhaps. That evening, as she prepared a simple salad in the kitchen, the sensation of being watched intensified. Glancing out the window, the backyard woods loomed dense and still, the tree line unbroken. Upstairs, while brushing her teeth, she swore she heard the faucet in the guest bathroom dripping, though she'd shut it off that morning. Checking, it was dry. The unease built like a slow tide, lapping at her resolve. She double-checked the locks on all doors, the narrow one included, and retreated to bed with the lights on low. The house seemed to hum in response, a vibration underfoot that she felt more than heard. In the quiet hours, as stars pricked the sky outside, Sarah lay awake, replaying the details. The draft, the footsteps, the shadow, the empty envelope. Coincidences, all of them. Threads of an ordinary life fraying at the edges, but deep down a question gnawed. What if the room behind that door wasn't empty? What if it held echoes of lives that hadn't quite left? She turned onto her side, facing the wall, and willed sleep to come. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the panes like impatient knuckles, and from below, ever so faintly, the pacing resumed. Sarah woke to the insistent trill of her alarm, the digital glow on her nightstand cutting through the dimness like a lifeline. She silenced it quickly, her hand lingering on the phone, as if afraid it might slip away again. The room was stuffy, the air heavy with the remnants of last night's restlessness. Downstairs, the coffee maker gurgled to life as she padded barefoot across the cool floorboards, avoiding the foyer on her way to the kitchen. The narrow door loomed in her mind, but she sidestepped it, focusing on the routine: pour, sip, stare out the window at the dew-kissed lawn. Willow Creek stirred awake outside, neighbors mowing early, a distant school bus rumbling down the block. Normalcy, she reminded herself, was just a deep breath away. At the library, the day unfolded predictably. She scanned returns at the front desk, the beep of the barcode reader, a steady counterpoint to the soft murmur of patrons. An older man in a faded cardinal's cap asked for books on home restoration, his eyes lighting up as she led him to the DIY section. "That old Victorian on Elm, huh?" he said, thumbing through a volume on Victorian architecture. Sarah froze mid-shelf, her fingers tightening on a spine. "How did you know?" He chuckled, a low rumble. "Small town. Word gets around when someone new takes on the big ones. That place has character, creaks and all." She forced a smile, steering the conversation to plaster repair tips, but his words stuck like burrs. Did everyone know about the door? Or was it just the house's reputation, a local quirk passed around like gossip at the diner? Lunch was a quiet affair in the break room, a turkey sandwich from the vending machine and a thermos of tea. She pulled out the empty envelope from her bag, smoothing it on the table. The impressions were faint, almost invisible under the fluorescent light, curves and lines that might have been letters erased with care. She held it to the window, but the sunlight revealed nothing more. Tossing it in her purse, she headed back to work, but the seed of doubt had taken root. What if it wasn't a mistake? What if someone or something wanted her attention drawn there, without saying a word? The afternoon dragged, her mind wandering during a story hour for kids, As she read from a picture book about a lost puppy finding its way home, the words blurred, replaced by visions of shadows under doors and pacing feet. One little girl tugged her sleeve afterward, wide-eyed. "Is the house really haunted, Miss Sarah?" The question hung in the air, innocent and piercing. Sarah knelt to her level, keeping her voice light. "Houses make noises, sweetie, like how your room might creak at night. It's just settling, saying hello." The girl nodded, satisfied, but Sarah's chest tightened. Was that all it was? Or was the house saying something else? Driving home, the sun hung low, casting Elm Street in golden hues that softened the edges of the Victorian. She pulled into the driveway, gravel crunching under the tires, and sat for a moment, engine idling. The mailbox stood sentinel, flap closed this time. No new deliveries. Just the quiet suburb folding into evening. Inside, the house greeted her with its familiar hush, the foyer light switch clicking on without hesitation. She bypassed the door again, heading straight for the kitchen to start dinner. A simple pasta from the pantry, boiling water filling the air with steam. As the sauce simmered, Sarah's gaze drifted to the hall. The outline on the wallpaper seemed sharper now, the rectangle more defined, like a scar healing wrong. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and approached, standing close enough to smell the faint varnish of the wood. No draft today, but the air felt thicker here, pressing in. She rapped her knuckles lightly, 3 quick taps, echoes dull and muffled, as if the space beyond absorbed the sound rather than bounced it back. No response, of course. Ridiculous, she thought, turning away. But halfway to the stove, a soft click sounded from behind her. The knob, turning a hair, then stilling. Her heart stuttered, but she didn't look back. Dinner first, then deal with it. She plated the food, eating at the small table by the window, the woods outside a dark wall as night crept in. The fork scraped against ceramic, the only sound besides her own breathing. Midway through, the phone buzzed, a text from her sister checking in. "How's the creep factor? Still no ghosts?" Sarah typed back quickly. "All good, just old house vibes." She hit send, but the message hung, undelivered. Signal dropped again. Isolation prickled at her skin, the suburb's quiet suddenly vast. Clearing the dishes, she washed up methodically, the hot water soothing her nerves. Upstairs, she changed into pajamas, the fabric soft against her chilled arms. The master bedroom felt smaller tonight, the walls leaning in under the bedside lamp's glow. She scrolled through offline notes on her phone, library schedules, grocery lists, anything to anchor her. But as the clock edged toward 9, the pacing began. Not from below this time, but closer, in the hallway outside her door. Soft thuds, measured and slow, circling like a shadow pacing its cage. Sarah sat up, breath shallow, and cracked the door an inch. The hall stretched empty, the air still. No footsteps, just the hum of the house. She closed it gently, locking it with a decisive click, and slid back under the covers. Minutes stretched into an hour, the sounds fading, then returning, fainter, as if teasing her resolve. Around 11, she heard the rustle again, not from the foyer, but from the walls themselves, a whisper of fabric brushing plaster. Her mind raced, pipes, wiring, but the utility closet downstairs was empty, fuses modern. Unable to stay put, she slipped downstairs in the dark, guided by moonlight spilling through the windows. The foyer was a pool of silver, the narrow door a pale silhouette. She didn't touch it, but stood there, listening. The rustle grew, emanating from within, like someone shifting papers or clothes in a drawer long unused. Then a sigh, human and weary, filtering through the wood. Sarah backed away, pulse thundering in her ears, and retreated to the couch. She pulled the blanket tight, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The landlord still hadn't called. Tomorrow she'd drive to his office in town, demand answers. But even as she planned, doubt crept in. What if no one remembered the door? What if it had always been there, unseen, waiting for her to notice? Sleep came in fragments, haunted by half-dreams of empty rooms and erased words. Morning light filtered in, chasing the shadows, but the unease lingered, a quiet undercurrent. Sarah rose, brewed coffee stronger than usual, and stared at the door from the kitchen threshold. It looked ordinary, unremarkable, yet the house felt alive now, watchful, as if the room beyond held its breath, anticipating her next move. She grabbed her keys, determined to break the cycle, talked to Betty again, checked town records at the library. But as she stepped onto the porch, the knob behind her turned once, softly, like an invitation unspoken. The door to her car waited, but the one inside pulled stronger, a silent promise of secrets just out of reach. Sarah gripped the steering wheel tighter as she drove toward the center of Willow Creek, the morning sun glinting off the hood of her sedan like a watchful eye. Elm Street gave way to Main, lined with tidy shops and the occasional pickup truck parked curbside. The landlord's office was a squat brick building next to the hardware store, the kind of place where faded signs advertised everything from plumbing supplies to notary services. She parked and sat for a moment, rehearsing her words. Calm, factual, no hint of the night's unraveling. The door to the room tugged at her thoughts, but she pushed it down, focusing on the brass bell above the entrance that jingled as she stepped inside. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a perm and reading glasses perched on her nose, looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" Sarah explained about the house on Elm, the locked door, the voicemail she'd left unanswered. The woman nodded slowly, tapping keys with painted nails. "Mr. Hargrove handles those properties. Let me check." Minutes stretched as she scanned files, her expression unchanging. Finally, she printed a form and slid it across the desk. "He's out on calls today, but here's the spare key protocol. Sign here, and we'll get a locksmith out next week. Old houses, you know. Sometimes doors get sealed for a reason, like preserving structure." Sarah's pen hovered. "Sealed? No one mentioned that during the showing." The woman shrugged, her smile polite but distant. "Victorians have quirks. Basements flood, attics shift. Better safe." Sarah signed, pocketing the form, but the vagueness settled like dust in her chest. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass from the park across the street. She walked to the library instead, the brick facade a familiar anchor. Inside, the cool hush enveloped her, shelves towering like silent guardians. She headed to the local history section, pulling volumes on Willow Creek's architecture and old property records. The books were dry, filled with grainy photos of the town's founding, mills along the creek, grand homes built by lumber barons in the early 1900s. Her house appeared in one, a wide-angle shot from 1925, porch pristine and windows gleaming. No mention of hidden doors, but a caption noted, "Expansive layouts with private studies for the elite." Private. The word echoed. She photocopied the page, tucking it into her bag with the envelope, its erased lines mocking her under the fluorescent lights. A patron nearby, an elderly librarian she'd chatted with before, glanced over. "Researching the old place. It's got stories, that one. Families who kept to themselves." Sarah asked if there were records of previous owners, but the woman shook her head. Most went quiet-like, moved on without fanfare. The drive back felt longer, the suburbs blurring into a haze of identical lawns and minivans. Sarah's mind replayed fragments, the footsteps, the sigh, the knob's subtle turn. Coincidences, or a pattern she couldn't yet see. Pulling into the driveway, the Victorian loomed, its gables casting jagged shadows across the gravel. She unlocked the front door, the hinges sighing as if relieved. The foyer light flickered on, illuminating the narrow door like a spotlight. It looked the same, faded white, unassuming, but the air around it felt charged, heavier, as if the house had been holding its breath in her absence. She set her bag on the hall table and approached, the photocopy crinkling in her hand. The outline on the wallpaper had deepened, the rectangle now edged in a subtle yellowing, like paper exposed to years of hidden light. No, that wasn't right. It had been pristine before. She traced it with her fingertip, the texture rougher here, as if wallpaper had been peeled and replaced once, imperfectly. Kneeling, she peered through the keyhole again. Still blackness, but now with a faint shimmer, like dust motes in unseen air. Her breath fogged the brass momentarily. From within, a soft rustle responded, not alarming, but intimate, like the turn of a page in a room someone didn't want disturbed. Sarah stood, heart steady but insistent, and fetched a screwdriver from the kitchen drawer, the one she'd used to hang curtains, not to force it, just to test the hinges, see if they budged. The screws were tight, painted over, but as she worked the edge gently, a sliver of give appeared at the top. Dust sifted down, fine and grey, carrying that musty earth scent. She paused, listening. The house was silent, but expectant. The floorboards beneath her feet warm, almost pulsing. Another twist, and the door shifted a fraction, not opening, but loosening, as if it had been waiting for permission. She stepped back, screwdriver clattering to the floor. The revelation hit, not with a crash, but a quiet bloom in her mind. This wasn't a storage space or basement access. It was deliberate, a threshold preserved, holding fragments of lives that lingered without force. The footsteps weren't intrusions, they were echoes, routines etched into the wood, replaying for anyone attuned enough to hear. The envelope, the drafts, the pacing, they weren't threats but invitations, the house drawing her into its quiet vigil. Previous owners hadn't mentioned it because they couldn't. Once noticed, it bound you. A subtle companionship that blurred the line between alone and accompanied. Upstairs, she gathered her things methodically. Books, clothes, the few unpacked boxes, loading them into the U-Haul she'd kept parked out back. No dramatic flight, just a decision, soft as the rustle behind the door. She left the key on the kitchen counter, the form unsigned beside it. As she locked the front door one last time, the knob of the narrow one turned again, a gentle click that followed her to the porch. The engine hummed to life, gravel crunching under tires as she pulled away, Elm Street receding in the rear view. Willow Creek faded into the distance, the highway stretching ahead like an open vein. Sarah glanced at the passenger seat, where the photocopy lay, its image of the house now ordinary, just another relic. But in the quiet of the cab, she felt it still, the faint rhythm of pacing, not behind her but within, a companion she couldn't quite shake. The road curved toward the city, promising noise and crowds, yet the silence echoed, a room no one mentions, waiting just out of sight.